All right, guys, welcome back. I am here with Rita Wen, and we're doing a special segment here today where we're basically chatting to some of the state's top achievers to get their tips, strategies, advice for future students. We really want to see how these students like Rita did so well, and we're about to get into that. So, Rita, thank you so much for being with us on the show today. How are you doing, and what's happening in your life at the moment?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, I'm actually starting university tomorrow at the University of Sydney, studying like education. I'll be also doing some more English there as well. So pretty excited.
I'm very proud of you for going on to study English and to actually pursue secondary education. Obviously, that has a close spot in my heart. And, I would love for you to just share a little bit about your journey. And let's start with, the results. You seem very humble, but I'm going to make you have to talk about yourself a little bit. So how did you go? What was your end result? Why have I got you on here?
For English, I was so shocked, honestly. I remember getting up, getting my A-Ton HC results. And then around 12 o'clock, I received a message from my friend that I got in state ranked. And I didn't even know like anything about how the state rankings works, anything. So it was so shocking.
So what was your rank and what were your marks?
I got state rank number 4, or that close to inspection. I think 3 people tied first. Yeah, I'm 99 for English and that.
That's just an incredible achievement. I'm sure everyone watching is just kind of like, wow, how do you get 99 in the exam? So let's rewind the clock a bit for you. Tell us about what your general approach was to the English advanced exam in particular. If we go to post trials, what did your preparation actually look like?
Yeah, post trials is a pretty big time to finish polishing up everything. So after trials, you have all your essays written. You had that practice. Yeah, what was really important was just like putting in the feedback from your trials and just revisiting each module, each essay. For example, for me, I had a bit of trouble in doing timed practice. I found that I ran out of time really quickly, and I revisited each module, common module, practicing that, short answer, in the time limit, practicing that essay. And same for like module C, which is really unique, trying to write that creative or that discursive during that time.
Yeah, that's great. Look, and let's dig a bit deeper into that. So if we look at the essay modules, what was your approach there? And for instance, what I mean is, did you have a core draft that you wanted to perfect before it and then practice other questions? Or were you someone who like basically never learned any core draft and you just practiced a ton of different questions and effectively got comfortable with writing an essay on the day?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I was a core drafter person myself. I really found that having a deep understanding of all the parts of the text, like the context, the author, the message, all the themes and values, and just like really writing that core draft and getting like so much feedback from a teacher was so important. But though some students, when they memorize essays, they fall into that trap of just learning that essay and just like writing it out on the day regardless of the question. But I feel one thing that English really needs in HSC is flexibility.
You mentioned that great point about knowing the text well. I would just love to know if you feel the same way. I feel like the text so well. So many kids take a shortcut there, and you can get so far in this approach, but a lot of students take the approach that, hey, I just need to know those core quotes and know where they fit in the essay, and I can try and tweak a couple of things. But I think that it's a very subtle manifestation that occurs when you know the text deeply and then you get a hard question. It might only be a small tweak that you end up making in the introduction, but that tweak was informed by that really deep understanding that you had in the text.
People joke about this so much. They go like, oh, I haven't actually read my English text at all. Or I only read half of it and didn't finish it. So I just having that really deep understanding, just like knowing all the parts of the text, and instead of just finding those cookie cutter internet essay quotes, just reading, just like skimming over it again and just looking at like, some underrated quotes that you found that other people might not use. Yeah, so being really diverse, it shows you really understand what's going on in the text.
You're saying you actually, beyond even understanding the text more deeply than that, you actually did have some backup quotes to use for certain questions. Can you tell us exactly how that played out?
Yeah, honestly, it was very different for each module and how many quotes I needed. For example, for module B, I did T.S. Eliot. There were like 5 poems, so you always have to learn like extra quotes. So just having like a couple extra quotes on like things like form. I know it's the same for module A as well. Sometimes they could ask on form, nobody knows. So just being really prepared, having those couple extra quotes.
Yeah, awesome. And in terms of the core quotes that you learned, how many would you say you did for each of the essays? And can you talk a bit about the structure module by module?
Yes, so for common module, I did around three body paragraphs, an intro, conclusion on like 3 different sort of ideas. And as for how many quotes I use, well, they can be pretty diverse depending on how you're writing it. But I like to use a lot of quotes to add that sort of sense of authority. And in that line, for example, I use like 5 quotes in the paragraph, 5 or 6, then really knowing how to integrate your quotes effectively. So using like something really long or using phrasing that, well, makes the sentence very long. Making it more organic in your phrasing can really help you integrate a lot of words, a lot of impact in like less words. So you can fit those quotes in. And for module A, since it's a completely different sort of type of study, it's like the comparative study, I know I like doing the integrated paragraphs. I feel that it made it more organic to compare the text. For module B, there are so many different ways to structure it depending on what sort of text you're doing. So if I was doing like different poems, I know I like to choose 2 poems.
Yeah, of course. But I really like that approach. I think the in-depth approach is what they're looking for, especially now with this new syllabus underway for a few years. I think depth is what we're moving more and more towards, which I think is really important. So you had the memorized core essay. Did you know did you know them word for word? Of course, with a flexible mindset, but did you know them all word for word with your essays?
Honestly, I kind of did. Like, I think I kind of.
Hey, it's fine. That's
thought
how I did it back in the day. I think it definitely works.
I feel like doing word for word, I know it might sound like really daunting or be like, oh, like you're not really learning the content. I feel like it really helps with the timing aspect of exams.
Yes, I'm so happy you're saying this because, that's what we always say. And you might have seen it. Memorizing and timing are so key for the preparation because you want to make sure that you've got a short enough essay that you have time to adapt, and you want to memorize so that you're faster on the day and that all of your mental energy is focused on adapting to the question. When you were timing those essays, what did you end up cutting them down to? What did you feel was a safe kind of threshold for you?
For the essay on the day, I know that every question can be different. So having that flexible mindset, I know sometimes I spent a bit more on module A. I spent maybe like 2 or 3 minutes extra because I found that question was really specific and a lot harder than, let's say, module B. Just having that extra couple of minutes. I didn't quite exactly time how long, but I did like a lot of practice papers, and I just knew like before the exam that I could actually fit it right in the 40-minute mark on the dot.
So how many practice questions would you say you did on average for each one? Because I think students really need to hear this.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I may have done at least like 10 questions for each module that I did, just like writing that full essay down, getting that time to practice and practice adapting. And so like just finding all those different past papers online and just doing them.
That's great. I mean, so about 10 is a good benchmark there. And obviously, everyone might have a different number that they did, but I think that's really extensive. Were you focusing on different types of questions every time you did it?
Yeah, I looked through like a lot of schools' past papers. Maybe I found some that were easy, so I could try a few of them, but I wanted to try a lot of the more difficult ones that had on very specific themes. For example, I found a question about mortality in Tempest and Hag's Seat, and I thought, well, we hadn't really discussed that in class, so it will be really interesting to see how I could bend the essay to that sort of theme.
I think that bending is so important. Let's talk about that in terms of the adapting. Did you find there were a couple of go-to strategies you had when you faced a new question or even when you got the question on the day? And what were the little tips? Like, were you just tacking on clauses at the end of every sentence to link back to the question? Or were you actually finding a relevant part of the sentence that you thought, oh, that matches well with that, and I'll reframe that, or I'll use synonyms? What was the kind of approach you had?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think I did a bit of both, as you said, both of that, tacking the extra clauses on, maybe adding a sentence after your topic sentence to like make it really clear what you're saying. And also while reframing parts, so using adjectives for certain words and like maybe replacing some words like if needed.
Yeah, that's great. And in terms of your introductions, I just want to focus on the intros for a second before we, wrap up on the specific details of these essays. With the introductions, what do you think you did that stood out?
Honestly, I think it's just understanding like the question because I know a lot of students, they don't actually directly answer the question. Maybe they waffle a little bit around it or throw some keywords in, but it doesn't actually really answer the question. It's like if someone actually asked you that, if your friend came out and asked you that question, how would you actually explain to them clearly?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And was feedback an important part of that? Like, how many times would you say you were refining these introductions and your essays as a whole? Like,
Yeah, finding your essay is such an important part. Getting that first draft done, and afterwards just rereading it again. Read it out to yourself. What words like do you need? What words just don't really add anything there? Or what phrases are just not needed? I know my essays were around the maybe like 1,000 to 1,100 marks. So just be able to cut down to what you know you can write in exams.
and so I don't want students to think the wrong thing here, because students love to, in my experience, love to kind of find a number of words that they should be writing. And you mentioned there are 1,000 to 1,100, but you also qualified it by saying you have to be aware of your speed of writing and know what you can write in the time. And you obviously are going to know that by doing practiced timed write outs. You were reasonably fast, in my opinion, at writing then, because 1,000 or 1,100 words memorized, then you're adapting that. That actually would take most people a lot longer than 40 minutes, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Just like, getting that timing ready, that deep knowledge of the text to answer the question, all those aspects really work well to make a good response.
Great. And if it's okay, tell us a little bit about Module C, because that seems to be stumping a lot of students as well. How do you prepare for that? You've got 3 different possible types. We know they could ask for a specific type: imaginative, persuasive, discursive. So what was your approach to preparing for that? Did you memorize a core composition and variations for the different types?
Yeah, Module C was honestly a very different module for me. And I found what worked for me was first knowing what markers like to read in Module C. So what Module C is really about. So one thing I found really important in Module C was having really that sense of purpose. I know what worked for me was that I had that really good like creative I really like to write.
Was it so you had a core imaginative draft that you learned? Is that right?
Yeah, that's actually what I did. And I had a core imaginative draft and I knew the ideas really well. So, yeah, I practiced on like 3 different prescribed texts.
Yeah, great. So just back to the point on preparing those cores. So you had the core imaginative, you knew that off by heart. Is that am I right in saying that?
Yeah.
And I assume you're actually able to use that, I think, for the question you got. What if they asked you for a persuasive discursive? Did you practice a variation of that, or were you going to do a completely different piece?
For my one, I actually wrote about Jane Eyre, kind of like intertextuality of it. But
so you wrote about another author, which would have worked so well for that visual stimulus of the kind of pencil. It was very much, it very much played into that intertextual, even metatextual idea.
So I just knew a lot about that one author, one text. And so I could easily adapt that into discursive. For example, I could talk a lot about like feminism in like my discursive or persuasive, also combine it with Margaret Atwood's one as well. So just really worked really well to find what sort of things work for you, do some bit of research.
Yeah, that's great. So I because I just want people to kind of leave with this with a clear plan if they're in the situation of preparing now. I mean, tell me if I'm right in saying this. Your approach was pick the style of writing that you like best. For instance, for you wanted an imaginative piece as your core one. The way you wrote that was based off the prescribed text or even multiple prescribed texts that you'd studied.
I mostly borrowed for Colin McCann for one of them, but I wrote enough for different ones.
Got it. Okay, cool. So prioritized one prescribed text, borrowed a couple of stylistic elements, wrote your own piece in an imaginative form, but then knew how to adapt what you were writing about into a discursive or persuasive. But you had one core one, and then you were going to adapt either side. And you did practice writing the other 2 forms out?
Yeah, maybe a bit less on the persuasive one, but yeah, I did write like practice discursives.
Yeah, that's right. And I think clearly you still went so well. It's about managing your time and priorities, isn't it? Like you can't spend all your time doing all of these different what if scenarios, but you should definitely be familiar with all 3 of the styles there. Was section 1 just a matter of doing a lot of practice questions? Do you have any particular advice for how students should prepare for section 1, the reading task?
Yeah, the reading task, I know it's a bit of a scary one because it's all like unseen text, never seen them before. So I guess that really comes down to, I think the first thing is knowing your module really well. So knowing what keywords you can draw upon when you're maybe bit out ideas, knowing what they're sort of wanting.
Yeah, that's great. And on that, I'd love to hear how you approach that structurally, because people always ask, how many sentences and how many quotes or bits of evidence do I need for a 3-marker, a 4-marker, a 5-marker?
So for my 3-marker, I know those ones are really meant to be short. What I like to do is I like to use as many quotes as the mark. So if it's 3 marks, I use at least three quotes, just making sure you're basically hitting the number of quotes you need to use, and you won't get like marked down because you didn't use enough quotes. But what I like to do is I like to look at the amount of time I had. So for 3 marks, I think the tip my teachers told me was that you double the amount of marks. So that'll be 6 and you add 1 minute. So 7 minutes for 3-mark questions.
You didn't think about it like a sentence approach. Is that what you're saying? You just did it. You just kept writing until that amount of time was up?
Yeah, generally like that. I used the number of quotes I needed. I wrote. Yeah, I think generally getting feedback on that is important. If you find out, say, you're not writing enough or you're going over the time limit, getting maybe your teacher's feedback to read through it, ask them, is that enough for the 3 to 4 marks?
Yes, great. And did you do a topic sentence, or like did you lead with a conceptual answer to the question, or did you go straight into the first technique and quote?
I usually did the conceptual sentences first. I found that maybe if I just started with the technique, it didn't really like have a nice structure to it in my view. I like to sort of answer the question directly at first. It gives you further direction as well when you're writing the rest of the answer, where you want to go.
And what about, so a 5-marker, did you start doing 2 body paragraphs for a 5-marker?
For like the 5 to 6 markers, for me it depended on what the question was. Usually if the question talked about 2 of the texts, I'd like to do a mini sort of essay style. So I started with like a mini intro. I introduced both texts a bit and their ideas, and then I did like 1 paragraph of one text and a second paragraph of another text, and if I had time, like a mini concluding statement.
So I think we can zoom out of that. Thank you. That's so comprehensive. I think that gives everyone a good idea of how you approached each section, and I'm sure that could work for a lot of people listening. Just zooming out, we'd love to wrap up just with your advice on general preparation for the exams, and also like how to approach year 12 as well. How much time, if we're being really real about it, how much time were you putting in to studying each day in the lead up to the HSC and trials?
Right, leading up to the exam, honestly, sometimes a bit hard staying motivated. I know COVID was like hitting us, we had a bit of a lockdown, but I found really good ways to set yourself like clear goals. How many English papers do you want to do? Download the resources beforehand, so you just have it right on your table, ready to go. I aim to do at least around like 2 practice papers, maybe for like different subjects per day. Maybe that would be at least like around 4 hours, but it depends how you're feeling.
Yeah, great. So I think that's a great summary of it. And that makes sense to me. If you prepare early and you're doing work consistently throughout the year, you're actually going to really reduce the burden of study later in the year when things can get very stressful. So Rita, thank you so much for your time. This has been really enlightening. I'm sure everyone listening has gained something from your perspective. And I really do appreciate you sharing all of that with everyone, because it's very kind and it is going to help a lot of people. So thank you so much, and congratulations on your success, and obviously wishing you all the best with your studies in secondary education.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Of course, anytime. Thanks, Rita.